The Eastport District, Opara, Taldor, winter 4718. In the night before their final and long-awaited return to Opara, the heroes of the War for the Crown, Aurelius, Diyanah, Demi, Marius, and Rankle, had fought their way through a Sacul-infested demiplane, used as a base of operations by the dreaded, but now thoroughly defeated, Immaculate Circle, to find the Soul Crucible and resurrect Grand Princess Eutropia. They had managed to do this successfully. They had also been joined by two of their long-time allies, the ranger Galindra and the witch Sepsinia, and also her anthropomorphic pig companion Pepper. As it was not possible to teleport directly away from the demiplane, such a thing would require a plane shift spell, which Aurelius did not have handy, they had to make the long trek back through the Rusted Dreaming until they were back in Yanmass at the encircling Bower Theatre. Once back on the material plane, Aurelius closed the portal to the Rusted Dreaming and turned his raven familiar Rodrigo back into his figurine form. Then he tagged the lion Raja, Eutropia's pet dog Taldogus, Pepper the pig, and Cookie the carbuncle, the fey rabbit that Demi had rescued from the Circle's huntmaster Count Goom, with his wand of carry companion. With their menagerie of pets all turned into convenient carryable figurines, Aurelius then teleported himself, Sepsinia, Galindra, and Eutropia to where Martella had suggested they meet to lay low in Opara, a place none other than Marius's own tavern, the Abadar's Key. As soon as they materialized in the old familiar space, Aurelius activated the Scion's dagger, summoning to his person Diyanah, Demi, Marius, and Rankle. Marius looked around his old tavern. It had been months since he had last seen it. It was at once familiar and strangely new. Martella had renovated it since they had last been to Opara. At great personal expense she had expanded its size, added a level, and put in more windows to improve the light. Marius took a deep breath, letting the scent of home wash over him. Wood polish, faint traces of ale, and the familiar lingering aroma from the bakery next door. The Abadar's Key had always been more than just a tavern. It was a piece of him, a foundation built with his own two hands. And now, despite the changes, it still bore his mark. Martella had been careful with the renovations, expanding and refining, rather than replacing. He ran a calloused hand over the bar, tracing the smooth grain of the polished wood. The old brass tankard still hung in their place, though gleaming now, freshly polished. The silverware, his silverware, was laid out in perfect order. Even the doilies that he had chosen on a whim all those months ago were still here, their intricate lace patterns untouched. Demi stepped up beside him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I think it suits you," she said, nudging his arm. Marius huffed, quickly wiping away the single tear that had betrayed him. It looks good," he agreed. Diyanah strode past them towards one of the sturdy tables, sitting down with a dull thump. "Better have food," he grumbled, rubbing his stomach. "Fighting giant bug monsters sure works up an appetite." As if on cue, the kitchen door swung open, and a familiar figure emerged, a curly-haired halfling with a belly just slightly larger than it was before. It was Arno, staring back at them, wide-eyed before breaking into a grin. "Martella said I could use your new kitchenware," he said defensively. "I can't keep up with the demand these days." Marius laughed heartily. "I thought I smelled something baking. Bring us some food and let's catch up." I mean, as long as you're not expecting it for free," muttered the baker. Diyanah pulled a minted platinum bar from his bag of holding that they had pilfered from Pythias' fortress in Zamar and dropped it on the table. "Arno, that's worth 1,000 gold pieces right there," he said assertively. "Bring us as much food as you can, and fetch Martella if she's around too." Arno's eyes went wide. "At once, your lordship, sir," he said, suddenly scurrying away to fetch Martella from one of the back rooms. A rush of warmth filled Marius's chest. He was home. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he allowed himself to breathe. But across the room, standing quietly near the hearth, Eutropia watched them with an unreadable expression. She was wrapped in the simple cloak Sepsinia had magically fabricated for her, her posture tense, her fingers gripping the fabric as if grounding herself. She had been given life again, pulled back from death's embrace, but the fear that she might lose her brother again had suddenly returned to her. Aurelius noticed this and stepped towards her. "We made it," he said, keeping his voice low. "You're safe." She turned to him, her hazel eyes sharp yet clouded with uncertainty. "I'm alive," she murmured. "It's Carius I worry about now." For a moment there was only the quiet crackling of the hearth between them. Then Demi, who had been inspecting the liquor shelf, spoke up. "Well, alive is a damn good start." She poured herself a drink and grinned. Now we just have to figure out how to infiltrate the Imperial Palace, confront Carius, activate Panavar's ring, enter his Mindscape, and maybe defeat 6 legendary emperors. Sounds like a piece of cake. Speaking of cake, said Diyanah, as Arno returned with Martella, as well as a serving tray filled with delicious pastries. As Martella stepped into the room, her eyes immediately locked onto Eutropia. Whatever thoughts she had prepared, whatever tactical questions she was ready to ask, all of it fell away in an instant. The Duchess Lothied, normally so composed, so meticulously in control, let out a quiet, breathless laugh. Shaylin's Grace, you did it. Before Eutropia could react, Martella crossed the room in quick strides and pulled her into a fierce embrace. For a moment, the weight of their station, their struggles, the war, all of it melted away. There was only relief, warmth, and the sheer impossible joy of seeing a friend returned from the dead. You really did it, Martella murmured, voice tight with emotion. She pulled back just enough to look at Eutropia's face, as if reassuring herself that this was real. I feared. Eutropia gave her a small, tired smile. You sure know how to pick your friends, don't you? Martella nodded her agreement and gave her a heartfelt thanks to the gathered heroes. Then, regaining some of her usual poise, she huffed and wiped at the corner of one eye. I don't cry. That didn't happen. Demi smirked into her drink. We saw nothing. Eutropia squeezed her friend's hand before stepping back, her expression growing more serious. We have a great deal to discuss. Martella straightened, smoothing out the front of her dress. Her mind shifted back to strategy. Yes, I imagine we do. Tell me everything. So they did exactly that, explaining what they had learned from Vadragon's journal, and all about the 6-legend soul. At the end of the explanation, Martella frowned. So this sliver of Panavar inside Carius now, you think this means if we just show up with Eutropia, he'll turn against us? If Carius is still in there as well, he might just be able to win against Panavar's influence. He does love his sister dearly. Nenarine seemed convinced he'll try to kill us, Rankle said, his arms crossed. The Ulfin Guard are already answering to him, so let's not risk a direct confrontation. Marius leaned back, drumming his fingers against the table. From Demi's reading, she said there was a way we might be able to form some kind of exorcism. We still have Panavar's ring. We just need to get to Carius, use it to access his Mindscape, and root out whatever's left of Panavar before it's too late. Martella sighed. Then we'll just have to infiltrate the Imperial Palace. The table fell silent. Which, she continued, will not be easy. Security has only tightened since Carius got back into the city, and news of Eutropia's surprising murder has begun to spread. The palace itself, much like the fortress in Zemar, is warded against teleportation and conjuration magic. No one is appearing or disappearing inside those walls unless they walk through the front gate. Aurelius exhaled sharply. Oh, of course it is. Martella tapped her fingers against the table, thinking. The guard rotations change every 6 hours. The night shift is the lightest, but even then, you'll have to deal with at least 3 station groups patrolling the halls. And don't expect to fool them with disguises. Everyone who works within the palace is closely vetted. Any secret entrances? Rankle asked. Martella tilted her head slightly. There are old servants' passages and hidden corridors, but I can't guarantee all of them remain unsealed. The best option would be slipping through the kitchens. There's an old wine delivery route that might still be in use. Aurelius shook his head. No, that's not the best option. Last time we fought our way through the fortress to Pytherius because we didn't know exactly where he'd be. But, Eutropia, you know the palace. Inside and out, you know where Carius will likely sleep at night. Describe it to me. I still think there's a clever, magical solution to bypass all the guards. I just haven't figured it out yet. Eutropia frowned, her brow furrowing as she considered Aurelius's request. His chambers would be in the royal wing, near the Hall of Triumph. It's a large suite, golden filigree on the columns, high windows overlooking the western gardens. It has its own antechamber, an ensuite bathroom, and a private audience hall. When we were children, it was my father's study. Her voice grew quieter at the last part, her hands tightening slightly at her sides. Marius was glad they decided to keep mum about what happened to him. Ensuite bathroom sounds promising, said Aurelius. I assume that means there's a mirror in there. Can you describe it to me? Eutropia gave a surprisingly detailed description of the mirror in the bathroom, and Aurelius gave a broad smile. Great, here's how we're going to do it, he said. You all remember that fun little spell I used back in Yanmas called Mirror Hideaway. I really liked that one, and I've since learned an improved version of that spell called Mirror Transport. Here's what's really cool about it. It's not in the Conjuration School, and it doesn't count as teleportation either. It's a kind of planar transit, not physical transit, as you move in and out of the mirror dimension. How does it work? Asked Demi. We can enter through one mirror and exit through another mirror within 500 feet. Okay, so obviously we exit through the mirror in Carius's private bathroom, said Demi. But what mirror do we enter? One that we bring with us, said Aurelius. 500 feet means we'll still have to at least get into the palace grounds, mused Marius. Oh, you unimaginative non-wizards, sighed Aurelius. I can cast Mass Fly now. That'll give each and every one of us in the party 2 hours of flight time. I can also cast Rope Trick. He looked pointedly at Demi. You must know that one, right? A classic, she said excitedly. Summons an extra-dimensional space with a rope hanging from it. So it's basically just a rope hanging from the sky. I think I know what you're saying, and it's pretty hilarious. I think I love it. Aurelius nodded, indicating Demi could explain. Right, so what Aurelius is thinking is he'll cast a mass flight spell, and we all fly until we're 500 feet over Carius's bedroom tomorrow night. Then he casts a rope trick spell, so a rope appears mid-air, hanging defiantly, from a random point in the sky, 500 feet above Carius's bedroom. To this rope, we tie a mirror, large enough for all of us to pass through. You're not at all worried that someone will spot a mirror hanging in defiance of gravity suspended 500 feet over the palace? Asked Rankle. You can cast invisibility on objects as well as people, said Aurelius. So before I pass through last, it will be an invisible mirror hanging 500 feet over a palace at night, and based on the current weather on a cloudy day. No one will see the mirror. Also, the other nice thing is that the mirror portal stays open for 2 hours, so if we run into trouble, we can literally escape out of the bathroom and come out the other mirror at any time. Diyanah laughed out loud. That sounds great. Imagine another group of heroes out there fighting their way all through the palace guards instead of doing this much simpler solution. The party chuckled at this notion. Despite their good humor, the weight of their task soon settled over them. The final stage of their adventure was set in motion. Today they would rest. That night they would enter the palace. They would confront Carius. 3 hours past midnight. Prince Carius's bedroom, Imperial Palace. The party's plan worked flawlessly. They had slipped invisibly through a magically suspended mirror and come out in Prince Carius's private bathroom. Typically, the prince's Ulfin guard would be posted outside the bedroom doors, but of course, it was in this configuration that Princess Eutropia had been killed. The party worried that perhaps this time the guards might be posted in the bedroom itself. The 5 of them, Aurelius, Diyanah, Demi, Marius, and Rankle, eased open the door. Before coming through the mirror, they had cast their usual selection of stealth spells, Silent Table and Invisibility Sphere. Inside the bedroom, they were greeted by a large 4-poster bed. Lying buried in a cluster of pillows in the center of the bed was Prince Carius, the softest of snores, revealing that he was in a quite deep state of slumber. However, as they had worried, he was not alone. A single massive Ulfin guard was seated at the foot of the bed, waiting patiently in the dark. A last defense should another assassin attempt to slip past the outer bedroom guards yet again, as had happened to Eutropia just 3 days ago. Demi recognized him immediately. It was a man named Vor, one of the eldest and most fiercely loyal of the guard, and the subject of a very specific and interesting rumor. She would learn soon enough that the rumors about Vor were completely true. He could not hear them, they were magically silenced, and he could not see them, they had been cloaked in invisibility. But as they drew closer, he turned his head upright and sniffed at the air. Vor is a werebear, said Demi softly to Marius. He can smell us. You have to close the distance and grapple him to get him in the zone of silence, or he'll sound the alarm in a moment. Marius wasted no time. He leapt forward and wrapped his arms around Vor. Vor reacted quickly. He had not been present at the death of Grand Princess Eutropia, but he sure as hell wasn't going to let the same thing happen so soon after to her brother. As soon as Marius's arms were around him, he began to swell up and grow. Within an instant, he was covered in shaggy brown hairs, and his face had become a fanged ursine maw. He was exceedingly strong, stronger even than Marius. Okay, we don't have time for this, said Aurelius impatiently. He cast the same spell on Vor that he had used against Mylan back at the Bettany estate. Marius watched in surprise as Aurelius's magic took root. Slowly but surely, the great werebear was turned to stone. We can unpetrify him after we've dealt with Carius, and everyone knows we're the good guys, added the wizard. Then he began to fiddle with Panavar's ring, aiming it carefully at Carius. The ring quickly attuned to the familiar child, and Aurelius found the ring was not so difficult to use. He willed it to open the door to the Mindscape. Sure enough, a human-sized portal suddenly appeared in the room. "Let's go in," said Aurelius. "Just so you all know, time will move differently in the Mindscape. For every hour we spend in the Mindscape, only 1 minute of time will pass in our real world. We'll have much more time than we think, but not unlimited time." The physical world faded away into white mist. When the mist cleared, the view had changed. Instead of a bedroom of marble and plush velvet carpet, a small circular stone chamber. In the center of the room, a human-sized ragdoll sat on a wooden throne, his body and clothes stitched together from several sources and bound together with 6 distinct chains. Around the outside of the room, 6 doors, each decorated differently. The first was a red marble door, glowing from within and warm to the touch. On its surface was engraved a vista of leaping flames. Tormented faces hidden within the flames stared out from the door with despairing eyes. The second was an iron door, dull and marked with countless slices and nicks. A curved scimitar embedded in the door appeared to drip a stream of red blood. The third was a narrow rectangular door cut from blue marble. The top of the door was very pale, almost white, darkening to deep azure near the floor. Engraved into the door was an image of a 3-masted ship. The fourth was a white marble door, covered with a shifting silver film of mist. Engraved into the marble was the image of a hooded figure, its hand covering its face as it whispered into the ear of another man. The fifth door was made of polished steel and inset with an inverted golden crown. A single teardrop-shaped ruby was embedded in the crown, like a drop of blood. The final arch door seemed worked from solid gold. In the center of the door, the image of a lion, rearing on its hind legs, its mouth open in a silent roar. "Okay, Demi," said Aurelius. "You're our resident lore master. What are we looking at here?" 6 emperors, 6 doors. 1 door for each of the 6 emperors, I'd guess. "Can you remind us about each of them?" said Diyanah. "I didn't always pay attention in history class." "Of course. Let me run through them sequentially. Emperor Taldaris ruled from -1295 to -1144. He was the first emperor and is kind of a big deal. You all know about him already, plus we met him in Axis. If I had to guess, I'd say he's behind the lion door. Emperor Syracuse ruled from 2087 to 2089. He famously oversaw the 6th Army of Exploration, which is the one where we conquered a stretch of the Mwangi Expanse, through what is known as the Ndele Gap. He was famously an explorer, and was killed in the Mwangi jungles. Probably the ship door, then. Emperor Darenlir the Overthrower ruled from 3564 to 3587. He seized power by murdering his cousin. He's best remembered for founding several long-standing organizations throughout Taldor, including the Imperial Arcanists Guild, and of course Taldor's famous Lion Blades. Marius jumped in, starting to figure out how this all worked. "Maybe the bloody scimitar, then," he said. Demi nodded. "Or possibly the upside-down crown." "Keep going," urged Aurelius. "Right, so after that there was Emperor Belden I, who ruled from 4077 to 4098. He ruled during the Taldor-Cheliac split. He's an odd choice, because Taldor suffered significantly under his reign. He was known for a sense of humor as well. They had no idea which door might correspond to Beldam I. Demi kept going down the list. Emperor Genaris III ruled from 4322 to 4328. He famously led the Heaven's Step Offensive, significant because it resulted in not just the retaking of significant Taldan holdings between Opara and the current Katheeran border, but also led to the retaking of Zemar from the Katheerans. Demi looked at Marius. As a war general, he's probably the bloody scimitar, which means Darenlir is probably the upside-down crown. The party agreed that this seemed like it might be the case. Finally, there was Emperor Stavian I, who ruled from 4526 to 4588. Stavian I is best remembered for being the last Taldan emperor to revitalize the Grand Campaign, and more or less set the current borders we use today. He also famously outlawed the worship of Sarenrae. He is well remembered in Taldor for expanding Taldan lands, but in truth his pogroms were pretty brutal. Many so-called Sarenite witches were burned at the stake for no crimes at all. "So the fire door," suggested Aurelius. "Yes," agreed Demi, "which means by process of elimination, the door with the men whispering at each other is probably the door for Beldam I. Which in fact reminds me of another detail about Beldam. Beldam's predecessor, Sidonis III, was killed by a conspiracy of plotting nobles, who felt like he was not fit to lead Taldor after the Cavern massacres. Beldam projected an air of joviality, but he was always paranoid that someone would do to him what was done to Sidonis. Perhaps the whispering figures is a reference to the conspiratorial thinking that was rampant in Taldor at the time of his rule. "So where do we start?" asked Marius. "Let's try to do these chronologically," suggested Demi. "I'd especially like to start with Taldaris, since we know him. If any of these spirits can simply be talked into leaving Carius, we know that he was always reasonable, and that could be such a spirit." They all agreed that this seemed like a good approach. The Legend of Emperor Taldaris. Beyond the golden door stood an idealized vision of Taldor from the ancient past. Golden fields of wheat rippled by the wind into ocean-like waves, extending as far as the eye could see, until they met majestic mountains at the horizon. Bone-white ruins jutted haphazardly from the landscape. A heroic figure stood atop a broken column, stark against the endless sunset. While the heroes had met the real Taldaris in their journey to the Eternal City, as a far older, wiser, and more humble post-mortal entity, the figure here was Taldaris as his empire remembered him, cunning, fearless, and strong. Taldaris stood atop the ruins, his chiseled features set in stone, his piercing gaze sweeping over the 5 intruders. The wind whipped at his cloak, his golden arbor catching the eternal sunset in gleaming brilliance. Brooding aloud, he said to the approaching party, "In a single lifetime, I forged squabbling children into an empire of men, and this is what you've done with my legacy. Entitled, foppish, soft little children once again, squabbling and sniping. It looks like Taldor needs me now even more than she did before her birth, and I intend to remain, no matter the cost." As he finished speaking, an elephant-sized lion stalked from behind the ruins, its 6 eyes and golden mane glowing in the sunlight. The legendary Grogrizant. The Grogrizant let out a deep, rumbling growl, its 6 eyes fixing upon the party with an eerie intelligence. Aurelius took a step forward first. "Great Emperor, we do not come as enemies. We honor your legacy and all that you have built, but the Taldor of today cannot be the Taldor of your time. An empire that doesn't evolve is doomed to stagnation." Taldaris scoffed, stepping off the column and onto the grass with a heavy, deliberate footstep. "Evolve. This is what the weak say to excuse their failures. Taldor is faltered because it has lost the will to be great. I won't allow it." He clenched his fist, and the Grogrizant prowled forward, its enormous muscles rippling beneath its golden fur. Demi tried next. "Do you not see that your presence here was guided by corrupt hands? We have seen the lengths the Immaculate Circle have gone to manipulate Prince Carius. Corruption like that of Panavar Lothide have no place in the Taldor you envisioned." Taldaris' expression darkened. "Do not speak to me of Panavar. He is but another coward who attempts to poison the strength of our empire. His ilk have always existed. I have carved out corruption before, and I can do so again." He raised a hand, and the Grogrizant roared, a deafening primeval sound that shook the ruins. Seeing the negotiations falter, Rankle whispered to his companions, "Well, this is going well." Before the Grogrizant could lunge, however, Diyanah stepped forward, his fingers reaching into his robe. "You speak of Taldor's strength?" he said. "Then let us see who is stronger." With a flick of his wrist, he released the figurine at his belt. Raja emerged, stretching into his full, massive form. The dire lion bared his fangs, meeting the Grogrizant's challenge with an earth-shaking roar of his own. For a long moment, Taldaris merely watched, his expression unreadable. "Very well. Let the old ways decide." He stepped back, allowing the 2 lions to close the distance. The battle was ferocious. Raja leapt first, his claws raking against the Grogrizant's celestial hide, but the legendary lion twisted, its 6 eyes tracking every movement as it countered with a crushing swipe. The 2 great beasts wrestled in a blur of golden fleur and flashing fangs, their roars splitting the very air. As the battle raged, Marius clenched his fists, stepping closer to Taldaris. "You think strength is all that matters? That might alone preserves an empire? If that were true, you would have lived forever. But you died, and Taldor lived on, keeping you forever in its memory." Taldaris turned his gaze towards Marius, a flicker of something, uncertainty perhaps, crossing his face. Marius pressed on. "Your time has passed. You were the legend that built Taldor, but every legend ends. We are its future, and we won't let it fall, not to Pytherius, not to Panavar, not even to you." Taldaris' eyes narrowed. The Grogrizant stumbled as Raja landed a powerful strike, forcing the celestial beast back. The Emperor looked at his lion, then back at Marius. "And you would fight for it?" Marius nodded gravely. "With everything we have." A long silence stretched between them. Then finally Taldaris exhaled. He lifted his hand, and the Groger's ant immediately ceased its attack, stepping back with a deep, satisfied rumble. Raja stood panting, not pursuing, but remaining wary. Taldaris' shoulders seemed to loosen, and the weight of eternity seemed to show in his gaze. "Your words ring true to my ears. Taldor was a dream I strove towards, but perhaps that means I'm still asleep. The world I knew is the one that needed me, and the world you hold now is one with very different needs. May the gods speed you on your way." Soon his golden form began to fade, dissolving like sand in the wind. "See to it that Taldor does not forget what it was meant to be." With that, the golden fields darkened, the sun setting at last. The door reappeared behind them, and when they crossed through to the other side, the golden door crumbled, and one of the chains wrapping around the miniature throne in the central dais loosed, turning to dust and vanishing into the ether. One chain was broken. 5 remained. The Legend of Emperor Syricus. As the golden light of Taldaris' realm faded behind them, the heroes turned to the next door, a deep blue marble portal emblazoned with the image of a 3-masted ship cutting through stormy waters. The moment they stepped through, the world shifted around them. A dense jungle stretched out beyond the door. Humidity clung to their skin like a second layer, thick and oppressive. Towering trees loomed overhead, and trunks wrapped in layers of moss and vines, while the air vibrated with the calls of unseen creatures. The scent of wet earth and exotic flowers mixed with the musk of hidden predators. A deep, rasping voice surrounded them, as if carried on the very breath of the jungle itself. "So, you come to hunt the hunter, eh? Damn good time. Find me then, and I shall grant you the kindness of a swift death." The laughter that followed was low, like rolling distant thunder, before vanishing into a chorus of chirping insects and rustling leaves. Demi adjusted the straps of her crossbow and narrowed her pale eyes. "He's moving fast, but he's not hiding from me." The others deferred to her superior tracking skills. Carefully she led them deeper into the jungle, following broken branches, faint footprints in the damp earth, and disturbances in the undergrowth. The path wound through tangled roots and knee-deep streams, the presence of their unseen adversary always just ahead. Finally, Demi had led them to a clearing. Moonlight filtered through the canopy here, painting silver streaks on the dark earth. At the clearing's center stood a man draped in furs and tattered Imperial silks, his powerful frame gleaming with sweat. Though long dead, Syricus appeared as he had in his prime, scarred but handsome, with piercing eyes and a grin that spoke both of confidence and madness. "Ah, worthy opponents," he bellowed, stepping forward. "You tracked me well. Let's see if you can fight just as well." At his command, the undergrowth parted, and something massive emerged, a spectral, hulking ape with hollow, glowing eyes. Mordal, who was Syricus's long-lost companion, reborn in this mindscape. The beast pounded its fists against the earth, shaking the ground beneath them. Without hesitation, Syricus struck first, his coiled lasso whistling through the air. It snapped tight around Aurelius' shoulders, yanking him down from the sky. "Gotcha!" Syricus roared, hauling Aurelius forward. Mordal lunged, jaws wide, only to slam into an invisible barrier. Aurelius had reacted instinctively, conjuring a resilient sphere around himself at the last moment. The ghostly ape snarled in frustration, beating its fists against the shimmering force field. The others rushed in. Marius closed the distance, his gleaming magical punch dagger flashing in the moonlight. Diyanah and Raja moved in from the flanks, striking from above and below. Rankle tried to distract Mordal from its assault on Aurelius. Demi loosed bolts from her powerful relic crossbow. Blade struck true, fists landed solid hits, and even Mordal's spectral form wavered under their combined assault. Yet, just as victory seemed within reach, Syricus let out a bark of laughter, his entire body dissolving into a wisp of golden light. "Damn, and here I thought I had you." His voice lingered in the air, carrying on the wind. "Come then, the hunt is not over." The party followed, chasing the glowing mote as it darted through the jungle, deeper and deeper, until the trees thinned, giving way to something new. The thick jungle ended at the edge of a vast, stinking mire. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and brackish water. Pools of stagnant sludge reflected the eerie glow of the wisps hovering above them. "No footing here," Aurelius noted. "Good thing I enchanted all of us with magical flight for the occasion." The party glided above the murky waters, keeping well above the floating debris and the swaying reeds. The mote of Syricus drifted ever onward, leading them across the swamp and into yet another transformation of the mindscape. The damp air shifted, the stench of the swamp faded, replaced by the polished wood and incense-laden halls of the Imperial Palace of Opara. Inside, a perfect replica of the throne room, Syricus stood before the Grand Prince's dais, his expression no longer one of mirth, but of quiet contemplation. The towering columns and gold-inlaid marble of the throne stretched around him, vast and empty. They landed softly behind him, and for a long moment he did not turn. "I miss it dearly, you know," he murmured, his voice lacking its earlier bravado. "Travel, adventure, the comforts of home, life." He turned at last, fixing them with a sorrowful gaze. "And it's simply not in my nature to give up on the things I want." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant echo of ghostly footfalls in an empty hall. Demi took a step forward. "We understand. Letting go isn't easy. But you were never a man to cling to a cage, were you?" Syricus let out a short, bitter laugh. "A cage, eh? Is that what this is?" Demi nodded. "You said it yourself. You long for adventure. But this, being trapped inside another's mind, this is not the freedom you lived for." Syricus ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair, looking back at the throne. "I gave everything to Taldor," he admitted. "And what am I, if not a man who refuses to give up?" Marius smiled at him. "Then don't give up. Not on your legacy, not on your name. But also, don't stand in the way of those who must forge the path ahead. We honor you, Syricus, but your fight is over." For a long moment Syricus said nothing, his hands curling into fists, his jaws tightening. Then at last he let out a long, weary sigh. Perhaps you're right. It's not about what I want." The air shimmered, the throne room blurred, fading into mist, and Syricus's form became light. Another chain shattered, another burden lifted. The Legend of Emperor Darrenlear. The moment the party stepped through the iron-bound door, they found themselves in a warped reflection of the Imperial throne room, but darker, heavier. The towering marble pillars that framed the chamber seemed taller, their shadows stretching unnaturally. The walls gleamed with deep crimson, as though stained with fresh blood. Sprawled across the Primogen throne lay a dying emperor, his regal silk soaked through with blood still oozing from a deep wound in his chest. The lifeblood spilled over the seat, running like rivulets along the cracks of the marble floor, weaving through the room like veins of liquid ruby. Standing beside the throne, impassive and statuesque, was the usurper himself. Clad in a deep purple tunic, furs draped over his shoulders, his presence commanded the room. Before him, kneeling in unwavering loyalty, were dozens of Ulfan warriors, each one an echo of the legendary guardians who had once sworn fealty to his rule. Their hands rested on their weapons, waiting, watching. Tall and broad-shouldered, Emperor Darrenlear the Overthrower turned to greet them as he adjusted the Primogen crown atop his head. "To a learned man, blades are no more threatening than a poorly wielded hickory switch. I command 1,000 men, ready to die at my whim. Can your would-be emperor command that devotion? Can you?" His voice carried a daring challenge, but there was no immediate hostility in his tone, only a supreme confidence, a certainty that his presence alone was enough to quell lesser men. The warriors did not rise, they did not reach for their weapons, not yet. Their loyalty was to Darrenlear. They would not fight unless commanded. Demi let out a thoughtful hum, stepping past Diyanah as she turned her sharp gaze to the kneeling warriors. "The loyalty of the Ulfan God is not simply taken, it is earned," she said, trying to assess the nature of the challenge the spirit would present them. Her words were not spoken in Taldan, but in flawless Skald. They seemed to ripple through the assembled warriors. Some exchanged glances, others gripped their weapons just a little tighter, but whether in defiance or contemplation was not yet certain. Darrenlear chuckled. "Clever words, but even I know words alone do not an emperor make. Still, your challenge amuses me. You think you can win the loyalty of my guards?" He chuckled. "Ulfan Guard, if these would-be champions think themselves worthy of your loyalty, let them prove it. Show me their steel, show me their skill, show me if they are fit to claim what I took by my own hand." A roar of approval rippled through the Ulfan warriors. They surged to their feet, forming a wide circle around the party. Their hands rested lightly on axe and sword hilts, waiting for the contest to begin. Each member of the party had only one chance to win the loyalty of as many warriors as possible, before Darrenlear would order those still loyal to him to attack the intruders. The heroes each took different approaches to prove themselves. Rankle, elusive as ever, did not fight and did not speak. Instead, he moved unseen, vanishing in the flickering light, a whisper behind one warrior, a tap on the shoulder of another. By the time the warriors realized he was among them, he had already disarmed 3. The message was clear. He was everywhere at once. He was always 2 steps ahead. Yet the directness of the Ulfin meant they did not favor his show of power. Only a single warrior stood behind Rankle when his turn was done. Marius took a more direct approach, stepping into the ring, throwing his shield aside. "No steel," he declared, "just strength." He raised his fists, challenging any Ulfin warrior who dared to face him. One after another warriors stepped forward, only to be felled in single combat, sent sprawling to the floor by his sheer physical prowess. Those he floored assembled loyally behind him. Diyanah's approach was similar, but he did not throw fists. Instead, he demonstrated his mastery of the Auroran martial arts. He moved without flaw, dodging, weaving, countering every strike with an effortless grace that turned his opponent's own momentum against them. He knocked an Ulfin warrior's axe from his grasp, caught it midair, and threw it across the chamber, embedding it into a distant column. "I do not even need to fight you," noted Diyanah, "to demonstrate that you would not be able to lay a finger upon me if you tried." 3 warriors assembled behind Diyanah when his display was complete. Next, silver-tongued Demi stepped into the center of the room, where the flickering torchlight painted dancing shadows. Her voice carried across the hall, not as a challenge, but as a story sung in Skald, the language of the Ulfin Guard, that spoke of the Linorm kings of old, who had earned loyalty not through force, but through honor and wisdom, a story of how legends must end so that new ones can arise. Her keen understanding of their own ways had won their loyalty. 3 more assembled behind her. Finally, there was Aurelius, the master of arcane deception. His approach was to cast one large and enduring major image spell, to peel back the veils of what was real and unreal, revealing the struggling child prince in his bed, fighting with the demons in his own soul. He was showing them for an instant what they were, not Ulfin Guard at all, but pieces of a disembodied spirit, clinging to a life no longer led. These honorable Ulfin wanted no part in the torture of a young child. They broke from Darenlir's camp and stood behind the wizard. Through each one of these demonstrations, the loyalty of the Ulfin warriors wavered. For every bold display of strength, another warrior was won over. For every impassioned word spoken, another sword had wavered. For every moment of doubt, Darenlir's control slipped further. Then, at last, Darenlir scowled, realizing he was losing his hold. "Enough!" He raised his sword. "Those who still serve me, kill them!" A handful of warriors still loyal to him raised their weapons, but they looked to their comrades who had already defected, and they turned their weapons on Darenlir. Darenlir gasped, his sword falling from his fingers. "Alas, I think, this time it is I who have been betrayed." He sank to his knees, breathless, as his form began to fade. His eyes locked onto the Primogen throne, as if trying to cling to power even in death. Then, with a final shuddering breath, he was gone. The Ulfin warriors, too, vanished, their task complete, their oath fulfilled. The stream of blood that once trickled from the throne soaked into the floor, leaving no trace. As they left this 3rd Mindscape, the crown door crumbled. Another chain shattered on the throne. The party breathed out. One more emperor had been laid to rest. 3 doors yet remained. End of chapter. Thank you so much for watching. You've just watched Season 6, Episode 4 of my Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown series. This is the penultimate episode of my War for the Crown series. In this episode, we finally go back to Opara, which, if we think of this whole season as kind of going inside out, is a great place for us to culminate. We end up back at Marius's bar, the very place where we started this adventure. It does feel like we've come full circle. All of the heroes have changed so much since they first met with Martella at that art auction at the very beginning of this adventure. So they're back in Opara, all back together. Eutropia and Martella are reunited. That's kind of a cool moment to have those two back together again. And they discuss how they're going to confront Carius and deal with this, with the 6 legend soul and the spirit of Panavar Lothid that is endured inside Carius. Obviously, I think there's probably like 4 to 6 pages of the book that's all about how to infiltrate the Imperial Palace. And it seems like an odd thing to do when the characters are supposed to be about 18th level, because frankly, they have so many tools to bypass all the guards. And also, it's worth taking a moment to think about sort of why PCs fight. They fight because they're villains and they need to be defeated. They fight because there's good loot to be had. But towards the end of an adventure, that becomes less and less important. Or they fight because there's a compelling story reason for them to fight. If you look at all three of those options, none of them apply here. There's really no reason for us to linger too much on the palace infiltration. Carius is what matters. So as my players started to puzzle out a way to kind of bypass most of the palace defenses, I kind of let them have it, because at that point I was ready to move to the concluding chapter. And I think that's one of the reasons why, for me, this ended up being one of the shorter seasons of this show, if you will, is because this the way I ran it, this ran a little bit shorter. There was some stuff that got cut in terms of getting access to Carius. It was, I think, intended to be slightly more complicated. Also, this has happened a few times in this adventure where the players have been confronted with people that are essentially guards or soldiers that are following orders, and my players tended not to engage with those types of enemies. So at the caravanserai, they didn't go into the caravanserai initially, all the way back in book 3. I think they knew that the commander was a traitor, but the regular soldiers were just following orders. To a certain extent, they avoided a lot of the fighting when they infiltrated Abadar's pillar. They really wanted to kill Maxillar Pytherius. They didn't want to kill a bunch of his soldiers. That wasn't really the point. And here we are for a third time. The palace guards are innocents, and my players didn't want to fight them. And I was fully supportive of that approach. And I was ready to get to Carius. So in the course of this session, they have a debriefing with Martella, and then more or less immediately they figure out how to bypass the security, and they go right to Carius. There is one little security layer that sits with Carius, but that is handily dealt with by Aurelius and a petrification spell, and then they are into the Mindscape. And here I present to you the first half of the travails through Carius's Mindscape. It's a very interesting concluding part of this whole series is the 6 legend soul. So the players are forced to confront 6 legendary figures from Taldor's storied history. And the cool thing about it is, high-level adventures are difficult because the players have so many tools and options, and being in the Mindscape sort of forces them into solving the problems in very specific ways. So Taldaris, they talk him down. Syracuse is a skill challenge. They chase him through the jungle. They do finally fight him. There is a conflict at the end of it, but it's predominantly a skill challenge. And similarly, Deronlier is also a skill challenge. They have to recruit as many Ulfin Guard as they can. All of that, I think, is really fun, and it's a fun and dynamic and different way to kind of end a campaign like this. They've already fought demigods and giant Sakiel monsters, so the fact that these final encounters get condensed into these kind of specialized events actually, I think, plays really well. I don't know if this was as fun for other groups as it was for us, but it really worked for us as kind of a concluding section. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the 6 Legends Soul and the Emperors in my final recap that's coming at you for the finale of Pathfinder 616 War for the Crown, coming at you in 2 weeks' time. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you there soon.